Please welcome the director of the Cecil B. Day School of Hospitality Administration at Georgia State University, Debbie Cannon.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I am honored to introduce the 6th annual Bharat Shah Leadership Speaker Series. This series of candid conversations was established at Georgia State Cecil B. Day School of Hospitality and the Robinson College of Business by Dr. Bharat Shah, a highly respected and well-renowned leader in our industry. Dr. Shah's vision was to share the intimate and diverse personal journeys of our lodging and hospitality icons, whose stories of struggle, perseverance, commitment, and faith have led to realizing the American dream. The series has served as an inspiration to all, but particularly to our students, the future leaders of our industry. Bharat's son, Mit Shah, is the CEO of Noble Investment Group, and in previous years has brought us into the living room for conversations with his father, with Mark Elliott, president of Hodges Ward Elliott, Mark Hoplamazian, CEO of Hyatt Hotels, Tom Baltimore, chairman and CEO of Park Hotels and Resorts, Arnie Sorensen, chief executive officer of Marriott International, and now Chris Nassetta, the chief executive officer of Hilton, whose 16 leading hotel brands span over 5,600 properties in 13 countries across the world. Dr. Shah and Mrs. Shah are in the audience today, and I would like to ask them to stand to be recognized, along with Mit's wife, Dr. Rishma Shah. Please stand. Dr. Shah, Mrs. Shah, Dr. Shah. On behalf of Georgia State University and the Hunter Hotel Conference, we are extremely proud to present the 6th annual Bharat Shah Leadership Speaker Series to you and to our worldwide audience on Facebook Live. Please join me in welcoming Chris Nassetta and Mit Shah.
Well, Mitt, here we are.
Here we are, buddy. How are you, my brother?
I'm doing great.
Great. Thank you.
I wanted everybody, first of all, I want to thank Mitt for inviting me. When he told me about the speaker series and said, would you make it? It was, we had a lot going on. We had our America's Leadership Conference this week, so we were doing a lot of conferences, but he said, this is really about, sort of leadership lessons for the next generation in our industry and trying to get people excited about the future of our industry. And I said, whatever it takes, I will be there for them and I'll be there for you. Now, he did spend, I'm not exaggerating, 4 hours of time with me, interviewing me, and sort of getting into the deep recesses of my mind about how I got started in life and business in ways that were a little bit troubling, I must say. And so, being somebody that likes to prepare, I just so you know, because I don't know exactly where this is going, I had an opposition research firm on staff that has done some work. So just be a little bit careful with what you share, because I have a slideshow of my own if need be.
So you've just clearly articulated the wonderful relationship that we've had for a number of years. So I think this is going to be really fun. And but I will say, Chris, we are all very grateful that you have spent some time with us. I believe that your story is one that will resonate with so many in the room, coming from an operating background, a family background, and we should just kick this off in talking about where your family came from. And I like to say when we have these conversations that everybody comes from somewhere. And your story is unique to you, but it's also a story that resonates across all areas because of how your family came here. And if you could just talk a little bit about that, grandparents and the orientation, of course, coming through this wonderful portal at Ellis Island, like so many did.
Yeah. So my grandparents on my mother's side were from Ireland, and my grandparents on my father's side were from Italy, and came to this country with nothing on both sides. My grandparents on my father's side told a lot more of their story. My Irish grandparents kept a lot to themselves. My Italian grandparents shared a lot, and my grandfather would tell the story when I was young about coming to America with his new bride, did not speak any English, had the equivalent of $10 in his pocket, but thought that America would provide for a better future, and it was a place where he wanted to raise his family that they didn't have yet. And so they came to Ellis Island, ended up in New York City. All of them migrated eventually to a little town called New London, Connecticut, which is where my parents met, which I'll come to. But my grandparents were, on my father's side, hyper entrepreneurial. They taught themselves the language, educated themselves, built businesses of all sorts. They came over. My grandparents, Italian grandfather was a woodworker, an Italian woodworker, but a very industrious entrepreneurial guy. So they originally came over here in the woodworking business, and then built a mill shop, and then ended up building an amusement park and a racetrack, and ultimately a real estate business, all from $10 in his pocket. Classically, in the 19, this would have been the 1940s, I guess. In the day, there was an Irish side of town and an Italian side of town, and the two, they were different schools, and there was basically segregation, and everybody, of course, their parents wanted them to marry within their, the Irish and Italian communities, and so my parents fell in love. My father was helping his parents at the boardwalk. My mother was working at the soft ice cream store. They met, fell in love. She was 16, he was 18. And when she turned 18, they wanted to get married, and of course it was a big hullabaloo about you can't, both sides. The Irish side didn't want the Italian boy, and the Italian side did not want the Irish girl, and that's the way those times were.
Yeah.
And my parents, thankfully, the love that they had for one another was more important, and they sort of did what everybody didn't want them to do, and became outcast a bit, and said, "But this is what we're going to do," and got married, and sort of the rest is history. But my father, he's 80, he'll be 89 in July. Amazing guy. Some of my team here would know him because he loves people. He really had the entrepreneurial spirit that his father and grandfather had, and that honestly passed down to me. When I was a kid, I was sort of into a little everything. My parents were wonderful parents, but very much focused on us making it on our own, and they helped us a lot, gave us a roof over our head and food and education, but if you wanted to go to the movies or you wanted to do anything, you had to have jobs and do things. So from the time I was a little kid, I had jobs. I had a lawn mowing business, paper business, painting business, snowplow business. I was, when I was as soon as I could drive, I had a team working for me to help me with the, of course, I got to drive the truck during the snow, and they got to shovel. If you had, I was learning early on to, be able to leverage appropriately. But, that's a great picture. I didn't see it. My God. So Mitt didn't show. I have no idea what pictures he's come up with. So these, I hadn't seen it. But in any event, sort of my family had a very entrepreneurial spirit. And that sort of, is what got me started in business, in a sense, at a very early age, doing a bunch of different things.
Yeah. 2 older brothers, 3 sisters?
I'm one of 6. And I have 6, so I've repeated history, although we were a little bit the Brady Bunch, 3 boys, 3 girls. My parents somehow did the more civilized approach of, split. I have 6 daughters and wouldn't have it any other way, but never, I know what it's like to have brothers, father, dad, don't know what it's like to have sons. And based on what kind of relationship I have with my daughters, I'm glad for that, because I have a spectacular relationship with all of them. But yes, that's an old picture. Not of my parents, that's a recent picture that you're looking at of my parents. That's, gosh, I don't even have it. I haven't seen that picture in a long time, probably since it was taken. Who is that dashing guy?
So that's high school. That's high school,
Mitt,
Chris.
Did you wear makeup in your high school picture? Where opposition research slides? Can we get the ones that Mitt up from? Where did you get that?
So if you
those are really just rosy cheeks.
Yeah.
Those
let's talk about this period of time in your life. Makeup was kind of a fad that people were going through, we're not going to judge. We're not here to judge, right? At all.
The part down the center too. Is that what I'm looking at there?
I'm sure that was a style back then. So.
At least it wasn't a mullet.
Oh wow! All right, so
did you have a mullet, by the way?
Do you have any slides?
No,
I did not have a mullet.
All right.
So.
I'll come back next year.
All right. Your dad.
That's my dad right there. That's a great picture of my dad.
So, grandfather was serial entrepreneur, dad entrepreneur, real estate, office and apartments, and also hotel. And so
Indeed.
Here you are in high school. And Capitol Holiday Inn.
There it is. There
right?
it is. Yeah.
Yeah.
My first job working for a Holiday Inn.
So just kind of talk to us about the time period.
Yeah, so I was probably, I think I told you the time, I'm not sure, 16, 17, but high school years and then through college, I had done all these other sort of cottage industry businesses, painting and all that, and I thought, it's probably time I, get a real job and figure out what the real world was like. And I needed resources to be able to do the things I wanted to do, and my parents were always sort of urging me along that path. So I said to my dad, I'm really interested in getting a real job. And he said, all right, well, I'll try and help you. What do you want to do? And we talked a lot about it, talked about the hotel business. And I said, I'd be interested in that. And he said, all right, well, I know some people in the industry. Maybe, I can help make some introductions. But on one condition, you got to literally, if you want to do this and you're interested in the industry, you got to start at the very bottom. Like, you got to get behind the walls, figure this out from the bottom up. So my summers during high school and to a degree during college, I worked at the Capitol Holiday Inn, 4th and C Street in D.C. Still there, still a Holiday Inn. Still, my family's been involved with the hotel. They helped. They were co-developer and are a co-owner of it. And I started out in engineering, literally at the lowest person on the totem pole. So those who in the audience have spent a lot of time in engineering or in the back house of hotels know what that means, which is my primary job was plunging toilets. And this building, I hope they fixed it, had a particular problem with water pressure. And I'm not making this up, we had more code browns per capita than any hotel on earth. And so that was sort of like, this was the coming of age is like, you want to get in the business? Well, you're going to figure out what the business is really like. And so, by the way, I did it, and I did it joyfully. And I'm not saying I like plunging toilets that much. With 6 kids, it helped out. I had a lot of practice for all that. But what it did, like any business, is you get behind the walls and you figure out. Like most people, and by the way, the bulk of you understand this because you're in the industry and have worked in hotels. But most people, your perspective on our industry is the only one you have, which is through the lens of being a customer. And it's like, going and seeing what's happening from the front of the house. And you really have no clue, as we all know who are in the industry, what goes on behind the walls until you get behind the walls. So at, the ripe old age of 16, I will say it was a real eye-opener. I mean, my dad would say, how is it going? And not only, the plunging toilets, but just a lot of stuff goes on behind. There's like a whole world back there, right? And when I was 16, not all of it was good, by the way, back in that day, you know, I'm not going to say like sex, drugs, rock and roll, but, you know, there were, you know, there's stuff that goes on in the back of house. And back then, my dad would be like, why are you so wide-eyed? I was like, oh, Dad. It was like, it was an education. Let's just put it that way. But, you know, and sort of what not to do. But it was also a great education in understanding, you know, sort of building the foundation for me of what I love about this business, right? And why I wanted to ultimately be in it. Now, I didn't immediately pursue it, ironically. Out of that in summer, I went, you know, and got an education and a finance degree and got more, you know, came out and got into the development side of the business. And then I did a lot of other things, as you know, like my father, I was developing office buildings and retail and residential apartments. I did a whole bunch of different stuff. And it was interesting. I was always sort of doing some hotel stuff around it. And it was like, I would, you know, go in to do a bunch of office retail, and then they, you know, wherever I was, whether it was Oliver Carr, my own firm, private equity firm, when opportunities came up in the hotel industry, I would always sort of raise my hand. And it wasn't like conscious. It was almost like the gravitational pull of my past and those experiences, and just realizing, you know, over time, that is something I really loved. And again, it wasn't that I woke up and said, you know, I figured out, you know, on a piece of paper pros and cons. It just was literally organic and sort of the gravitational pull that it kept bringing me back to the industry. But it started with a real understanding of what happened in my summers, not the funny stuff that I was talking about, but the elements of the people side of it. I really like people. And I like interacting with people, and I like complex equations that can do that if properly put together can make magical things happen. And that's what our industry is, right? It is all about the people. I say it all the time. Our team probably gets tired of hearing it. You know, our industry is a business of people serving people. Sure, we have technology. We do a whole bunch of different things. But at our core, we are a business of people serving people. And that's what, you know, I learned when I was 16 through 20 working in the back of houses. It really was about the people. That the alpha, you know, sort of how you made a difference in making these things tick behind the walls was just all about the people and how you attracted and cultivated the right types of people and the right culture to make that magic. And that's why the gravitational pull just kept bringing me back into it till eventually I said, why am I fighting this? This is something I really want to do, and I want to do it for the rest of my career.
So when Dad wanted you to be, you know, eldest brother, doctor, middle brother, lawyer.
Look at
and,
that picture.
And so,
wow.
you know, when you think,
where did you get this stuff?
So immigrant parents, I mean, look, we all come from somewhere, right?
Yeah.
But the safety, security of being a doctor, being a lawyer, and being an engineer.
I was trying to skip this part of the story.
But you were supposed to be an engineer.
No, I was supposed to be a lawyer.
Okay.
I was supposed to be a lawyer. So, yeah, my grandparents didn't speak English, immigrants, entrepreneurs, they made their way. And so, like a lot of that generation, what they wanted is their children, because they had no education, to have an education. So my father was the first and only in his family of 4 that went to college. He went to Georgetown and Georgetown Law School. He was the only one in his family that they didn't have enough money, you know, in those days, and they couldn't make it happen, but they made it happen. He was the baby of the family. He made it happen for him. So, you know, my dad and mom, but really driven by my dad, was like, you know, offspring of immigrants, like, you've got to have a vocation. Like, so he had 6 kids, 3 boys, 3 girls. We should talk about women in leadership before we're done. But in that day, it was much more, sadly, about the boys than the girls in terms of careers, at least, you know, my father's generation. So he had 3 sons, and he had a plan. And that is, you guys all have to have a vocation. I want a doctor, I want an engineer, and I want a lawyer. That's it. You know, because then you can take care of yourself, you can have a home, pay a mortgage, have a wife and children. It was really that simple. And if I get my sons to get those degrees, sort of my job is done. And so, okay, I'm the youngest of 3 brothers. My oldest brother, engineer. Check. Okay, great. Dad's happy. Next oldest brother, we both went to UVA. He went on to UVA Medical School, doctor. All right, check the box. Then the deadbeat son comes along, and I'm like, I go to UVA, I go to McIntyre School, finance. I'm a financially oriented degree, and then I get out and I do the LSATs and all that, and I apply to law school. And I get waitlisted at one, I get into one I want to go to, and that summer I go travel the world with a couple of friends, and I came home and I decided I don't want to be a lawyer. Like I just don't, like that's not my love in life. It's not, I'm not going to be good at it, by the way. Some people, it's not my natural skill set. And so I said to my dad and mom, like I came back from this trip, it's like, I'm not going to law school. I already turned them both down, and I'm not going. My father was devastated. Like he didn't talk to me for months. He wouldn't yell and scream. My dad was never laid a hand on me, never yelled at me and screamed in his life. It was just nothing, just nothingness, where I did not exist because that was the plan. I was the lawyer. We obviously have a fabulous, or maybe not obvious, we have an unbelievably close relationship now. We have for decades and decades, but it took a while to get past that, where that was sort of his plan, and it wasn't selfish so he could say, I have a son that's a lawyer and a doctor and engineer. It was his view of what he needed to do his job to make sure we were on a path.
Right.
And I was not letting him do his job.
Yeah. So let's talk about the path. That led you to Oliver Carr Company, and as an analyst.
That's a great picture too.
Yes, as an analyst, and so let's go from that.
As an analyst, when there was no such thing
as an analyst, right?
When I was at UVA at McIntyre finishing it, the younger people will laugh about this. The computers were mainframes with key punch. You would go in and have punch cards and go, or a number 2 pencil, and pop, 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 pop. And we were actually doing a test deal with Apple for the first PC. It wasn't even out publicly available, but because Apple was doing a deal with a bunch of the better business schools, we had Apple PCs. So when I got to Carr, the analyst program was like, mostly like, ledger paper, it was just the very early days of having computers. I still laugh, like the first portable computer was, you can watch, by the way, there's a show on Compaq, but Compaq made the first portable computer, and it weighed about 50 pounds. Like it was the heaviest thing. It was like a huge suitcase, and I would carry every weekend 2 of them home because it had the workspace of, no workspaces, so you'd have to have 2 of them to like be exporting files and importing. I mean, margin of error was like 100%. Yeah. Like, I mean, it was like literally, there was no way you weren't going to make a huge number of mistakes. So the whole point of the computer was sort of thrown out the window because, everything was going to be screwed up because, the technology was such in its infancy. But yeah, I started an analyst program there, and, back in the day, Oliver Carr was a great company, East Coast, Middle Atlantic developer, the biggest in the Mid-Atlantic, I think one of the most successful. Oliver Carr is still alive. He's 93. I saw him recently. He's doing great. But they were from the old, an old era of how they did things. They were city planners and architects and engineers, and really good at that. Okay, there may be some alumni in the room, but they were not financially oriented. So the whole idea of like a financial analyst department and thinking about how do you analyze the underlying economics of transactions, how do you finance them in a more sophisticated way, that was all like cutting edge. Like today, what we take for granted, back in the day, the best developers were more of their ilk, which was city planners and architects and master plan, how do you build great places, and less about how do you make the underlying economics work right and finance them in a very sophisticated way. And you had some of the big nationals coming up like Heinz and Crow and others that were sort of changing it, but that was just happening at the time. And so it was an amazing experience to be there sort of at the advent of that, like taking an iconic company and trying to help it evolve and transform into a more sophisticated, having a more sophisticated approach. Now, they got caught, and this is reasonably well known, in the downdraft of the S&L crisis, and because they had not been as sophisticated in terms of how they, had thought about the financial elements of things, they ended up in very serious trouble. In that picture you see, Terry Golden was one of the greatest mentors I had in my life. He had a long history of workouts, with Pumice Del Mar, Hilton Head Island, Trammell Crow companies. I mean, Trammell Crow wrote his autobiography, and there's a chapter on Terry Golden in the book. And when we ran into all these problems at Carr, we brought him in, and he and I partnered in restructuring the entire company and keeping it out of the jaws of bankruptcy and a complete failure. And I was in my 20s, late 20s, and it's one of those things, like I'd say to the young people here, like, when things are good too long, you don't build the right muscle set because you don't figure out, that things aren't going to be good forever, and you don't figure out, sort of what happens when things unwind and how to protect and mitigate against risk and the like. This, at a very young age, being at Oliver Carr, which ended up doing fine and going public, and ironically, Blackstone bought them too. Eventually, Blackstone sort of buys everybody one way or another. But this was like the greatest experience a young person could have ever had, because it was, unwinding and rebuilding a company and restructuring a company, to allow it to survive and prosper. And these were things that, as a young person, I had no clue about, but I had a mentor that had done more of this kind of work than anybody probably in the United States, maybe even the world, that was like sort of expert workout person.
So the two of you, with that experience, now you're armed with this incredible ability to actually see through, this crisis and how to figure out value, decide to go step out on your own and form Bailey.
Yeah, that was hard. I'll never forget it. I was on my honeymoon, and I didn't get to, we were doing the workout. I didn't get to go on a honeymoon when I got married, but later that summer we went to Europe, my wife and I, and did a quick trip, and we were in Paris, and we were having dinner and drinks, and I said to her, how would you feel about like me quitting my job where I'm doing okay and like starting this new company? And she's like, what? Like, what do you mean? I thought you had a job, and I married a dude with a job. And so what does that mean? Well, I said, that means like, we probably can't buy a house right now. We probably can't start having kids. I'm going to borrow money to start the business. And if it doesn't work, we're going to go bankrupt. But you should not worry about it. I didn't quite put it, obviously I know how to spin. So I spinned it as best I could. But she's a pretty smart gal, and she figured out right away that, geez, this is really risky. This is an important note, though, about partners in life. My wife is, my life partner. So you told me you'd get me to get choked up, and I will. But my childhood sweetheart, she's been along the entire journey and been the greatest supporter of mine and mine of hers. She is an entrepreneur, not in a business context, but very entrepreneurial in her thinking. And to her credit, notwithstanding the description I just gave you, she was the biggest advocate for taking the risk and saying, like, this is an opportunity with a guy like Terry Golden, who you can learn from. You're young. We don't have kids. We don't have a lot of obligations. I'm not afraid. Like, I want you to do this because it's the right thing to do for you, and I'm right there with you. And so, by the way, every step in every risk that I've taken, which I'm sure maybe we'll get to more of, and every time when you look back, like I look back and I'll talk about Bailey, and then you look back at Host, and then you look back at Hilton, and in the rearview mirror, it all looks like, well, it was easy, like they all worked, like success. But I'm going to tell you, and like everybody in this room that's been through these decisions, they're not easy decisions, and there's huge risk, and it's never clear that it's going to work. At the moment I decided to quit my job, where I was making, for a young guy, a lot of money, where I could have a house and I could pay the mortgage and I could have kids and provide for my wife, literally going to zero and borrowing money, that's a big decision. You have no business, right? Yeah, I mean, I I thought we could make it happen, and I had a great partner who was going to help, loan some money to the business that we had to pay back, but it was really risky. When I left my business to go to Host, really risky. When I went to Hilton, with an LBO at the peak of the cycle with $26 billion of debt, and I had a pretty good job that paid well and a good life, not a risk-free decision. But back to my life partner, none of those decisions I would have made without her. None of those, not one of those would I have done without her by my side, not just there, but encouraging it and being not just a partner, but a thought partner in doing it. So fast forward, Terry and I built this great little business. Like, we started with nothing, it was risky. I borrowed money, I ended up buying a house anyway. It's like, what the hell, if we're gonna go, let's go big. I didn't buy a big house. I still own it, by the way, sentimentally. It's a small little Cape Cod that we love. And we started this business, and it went really well.
Wow.
We ended up, doing a bunch of big, this is during the end of the S&L crisis. The banks were in deep trouble. They needed help on a bunch of things, and a bunch of the biggest banks ended up hiring us to do big time advisory work with liquidation work for, asset pools that they needed to get rid of. It ended up being super lucrative. We worked our butts off, but clearly another life lesson, everything takes a little bit of luck, a time and place, and this clearly did. But, in that business, I think we borrowed money for 3 months, and we paid it all back within 3 months. And then I owned half, and then we owned the business 50-50 from there.
And you got a lot of great experience in terms of fixing yet other situations that people came to you to go fix. And so now let's fast forward, and this situation for you is in 1995, but in 93, we all remember the headlines. Marriott's split of their real estate business into Host Marriott, lawsuits.
By the way, I remember the real headline. If you lived in Washington, D.C. then, which I did, and Marriott's a Washington-based company, Regardi's magazine, which no longer exists, but those, if we have any Washingtonians have been around my age, you would know that was sort of like the Washington magazine, Bill Regardi. The front cover was a picture of Bill Marriott in a dark room in a shadow, and it said, "What happened at Marriott?" That was 1993.
Yeah, and it's interesting enough, your dear friend Arnie was the litigator, that Marriott hired. That's how Arnie and Bill
got to
so
Marriott.
your story transfers where now it's Host Marriott is split, and it's like, hey, here's this company over here with all this stuff that's over there, and we're going to keep Marriott very pure. And I think a couple of years after looking at it, it says, gosh, we really do have a bunch of just stuff here in this company. We need people that can go and help us fix this, help us reimagine what this business could be.
Yeah, when it was done, and no offense to anybody who did it, they did exactly what one would do, at the time, which is sort of break it apart to make sure that you give the core business the greatest likelihood of success, and create two businesses. In the day, it was affectionately called Good Co and Exco. Well, let's just say Bad Co. And Host was not Good Co. Okay, and that wasn't because anybody did anything wrong. It was just that that it was sort of set up in a way where the brands and the management and the franchise and all of that, which were sort of the crown jewels, were actually spun out, and what was left behind, which was a huge amount of debt, tax liabilities, LP, public limited partnership lawsuits, and all of that stuff was sort of left behind. And so, when we got there, Terry Golden and I came in as a team. We ended up in our private equity business doing great for 5 years, and then we got, recruited as a team to come into Host. It was yet again another, so I did workouts at Carr. I did workouts in my own business effectively for the big banks, and did a lot of growing and buying as a private equity enterprise. And then when we got to Host, in a sense, very quietly, I would argue, it was very much a workout. Now, you wouldn't go back and look at it, in the rearview mirror that way, because we didn't shield it intentionally, but we were growing so rapidly that a lot of the workout elements sort of just got swept under the rug. So, but they had to be dealt with. Like we had to deleverage, we had to resolve billions of dollars in tax liabilities and limited partner, litigation and all of those things. But we were here at the time in the S&L, coming out of the S&L crisis, where there was a massive dislocation in the business, and we said this is a great time to grow a hospitality real estate business. Now, when you look at it, you've had all the capital formation that's sitting in this room and private equity everywhere. In those days, none of that existed, or very, very little of it existed. Real estate private equity was in its nascent stages, and I'm going to tell you, they didn't like lodging because lodging was viewed as too high beta, right? So they sort of stayed away from it. So at Host, we said, wow, there's a huge sort of supply and demand imbalance. There's a massive supply of product, not a lot of demand, not a lot of money chasing it. Pricing should be good. Let's fix this thing up. If we fix it right and tell the right story, we can raise a lot of capital around it and grow it, and that's what we did. So we did a workout, and we had sort of simultaneously a big workout going on while we were growing the business from whatever, a $3 billion business to a 20-some billion. I mean, we were growing at leaps and bounds at the same time.
First Fortune 500 company, first lodging space, and first lodging company in the S&P 500. I think this series.
We made it a good co. I mean, the common theme on all of this ends up going back to something I said before: people. Whether it was Oliver Carr and sort of trying to fix that, whether it was the work I did in my own little company, or Host, or Hilton, the common theme in all of it is culture. It's about the people. And so what we did at Host was, build, sort of completely rebuild the culture and build a strategy that people would buy into. And we painted, even though we had a lot of issues to deal with, we tried to paint a picture for the people of the company that tomorrow's going to be better than today. And if we have a plan, if we execute that plan, we can really create something quite special. Don't get mired in like we split up and there's good co and bad co. Yeah, that's irrelevant. We got what we got. We can make it something really special. But we got to believe. We got to have a plan, first of all, and then we got to build a culture. We got to believe, and we got to be really diligent and work towards it. And we did. Host is still a spectacular company. Hopefully, some of their folks are here. It's a leader in their space in the industry, I'm very. I haven't been there for a long time, and gosh knows I was one part of a very complex equation to do what we did at Host, but I'm really proud of what we were able to do while I was there and what they've been able to do since.
So now it's 2007. You're the family of the Bay, we've shared the story. You leave your BlackBerry in the car and you go and enjoy time with the family. But walk us through this day.
That day?
That day specifically.
It was John Gray and I have had a multi-decade friendship. So now probably, approaching 30 years. I literally met him the second day he joined Blackstone. So as long as he's been there, 25 plus years. At that time, it was, 12 or 15 years, and we'd known each other well. We had done a lot of things together, bought, sold, did a big merger deal. Well, they ended up being our largest shareholder at Host, and they were represented on our board. So I knew these guys really well. I didn't have good cell service in my house at our home on the Chesapeake Bay, so I'd always leave my then BlackBerry as you suggested, in the car, and I'd go out there in the morning, and it was 4th of July 2007. I went out, and literally I had it was 4th of July. It was like, you'd think you'd have a few emails, whatever, stragglers. I had like 100 emails, and I was like, oh my God, the thing's blinking. You remember back, it was like Pavlov's dog back to BlackBerry? Worst thing they ever did, where the light would be blinking faster with more. I was like, ah! So I started reading it all, and it's all because, Blackstone had announced that they had bought Hilton. And I was walking down, we were doing a outing with my in-laws and all the kids, and gonna go out and have a picnic on the boats and stuff. And I was walking down, and I was totally in the ozone, thinking, and my father-in-law walked by, and I barely recognized him. He's a wonderful man, and so I feel bad about that. But he said, so he comes, he turns around, he says, what's wrong with you? And I was like, oh, God, sorry, Ed, I'm sorry. I said, I'm just thinking. And he said, what do you think about it? I said, I just read a bunch of emails, and I have this sneaking suspicion that this could change our lives. That's literally, he reminds me, those were my exact words. And he says, what do you mean? And I said, I'll tell you later. And the reason I thought that is not because John had called me at that moment. John called me a day later or something, a couple days later. But I just had this sneaking suspicion, and that, I had been doing all these different things in my career, and I wasn't the most obvious guy, by the way, to go run Hilton. I had spent all the time in the brand world that other people had, but I had spent a lot of time with the brand companies as an owner and in the ownership side and a bunch of different aspects, operationally of the business. And I just had, intuition. And so when John did call a couple days later, I said, John, I laughed. I said, I had this feeling. He said, you got to just agree to have lunch with me. I was like, John, we're friends. Of course I know, but I want you to keep an open mind. I was like, there's no way I'm taking my wife and 6 kids and moving to Beverly Hills. My life partner's from a little town southwest of Little Rock, Arkansas. She was like, it's going to be like the Beverly Hillbillies. There is no way the Nassetta girls and this guy. There's just no, John, it's a bridge too far. Just agree you'll have lunch.
Don't say no. Just
Don't say no, we'll have lunch. So ironic, I don't know what, because he was staying there, we had lunch at the Occidental Grill on Pennsylvania Avenue. My first job was doing the Occidental Grill. It was part of the Willard hotel complex. It's Joel, it's a nice IHG, the Willard Intercontinental. That was my first job out of business school. And we met and had lunch there. And, John's a very persuasive guy, as, he didn't get where he is. Look at that smiling face without being very persuasive. And I told him, there's no way, there's no way, there's no way. We had lunch. He called me that night, called me the next, And eventually, to the credit of my wife and life partner, I was talking to her about it, and she said, your instinct on July 4th was the right one. You had that instinct because this is meant to be. You love the company you're at, Host has been great to you, but you want to grow and learn and do something different. When are you going to find the opportunity to take on an iconic company like Hilton that does need to have things done and fixed, and where you have a partner in John Gray that is a longtime friend and partner? It isn't going to come around every day. Don't be stupid about it, right? Yep. To her credit, without knowing, our industry in great depth, and that sort of turned the corner. And so one thing led to another, and a few weeks later, I was at the Waldorf Astoria doing an interview with Wall Street Journal, and we were doing it.
So John, at the time, 2007, had just literally taken over the real estate business, for Blackstone. This is the biggest thing that he had ever done.
Yes.
And I think, coming to you is, we've talked about, he was literally risking, kind of the biggest thing he's ever done on someone that he felt like could make it the best thing that he might have done. But then we fast forward, and
Yay.
a year later, the world looks very different than it did on
bad.
July 4th at the Bay in 2007.
Everything was happy out on the picnic on the water and thinking about how great it's going to be. And and then bam.
Bam. So now the outcome is.
So that was hard, yes.
That was hard, right?
I'll stipulate that was hard.
Yeah.
Probably the toughest thing, certainly I've dealt with in my career, and I think probably ever will. And as I said, sort of life lessons. Adversity builds character. You hear that all the time, but it really does. It also builds skills. And so the trick for us goes back to culture. We had a good strategy, and we were building a good culture. But that's what was going to get us through. Now, we needed John Gray and Blackstone to be supportive, and ultimately they invested more capital and all those fun things. But in order to not have to start breaking up the furniture and to keep the and throwing in the fire to keep the place warm, we had to get hundreds of thousands of people and thousands of partners like you, Mitt, and all the rest of the owners in the room that were the engine of growth for the company to believe that not only we were going to make it, but that we were going to be able to prosper, and that we were able to ultimately be a dynamic business going forward. And so the greatest leadership lesson then was, for me, it was hard. It was the hardest thing I've ever done, like shutting down the global headquarters and looking everybody in the eye to do that. Reading the headlines that you're nice enough, you put some of them up here, like Blackstone's black eye, going to be the biggest hotel bankruptcy in history was on the front lines. John Gray and I love to play all these these headlines back. But we had to keep our nerve. We had to keep, one of life's lessons is steady hands on the wheel. Like if I started to act and behave in a way that was consistent with the headlines, the business would have fallen apart because nobody would have believed. The hardest part of that job was painting a picture of why tomorrow, even in the midst of all that, could be better, and actually keeping my chin up and finding things that we could do, that we could celebrate to keep hundreds of thousands of people believing in where we were going. And it was not, there were, there were dark days. I'll remember the darkest, which was we were in the middle of it, and then I'm not going to get into any details, but I think you had a headline up there. We got sued by one of our primary competitors. There was this, it ended up all getting resolved, federal all this crazy stuff while we had all this debt. The world was upside down. The business was, broadly, the whole industry was in deep trouble. And of course, we were much more leveraged than everybody else. So, the trick there would have been easy to sort of lose faith. It would have been easy to jerk the wheel around, so to speak. But, we kept steady nerves, steady hand. We had a good strategy. We were really building a great culture. And our people, not just me, by the way, there are people I'm looking out, Danny, all Bill Fortier and all of our team, we kept forging ahead. And we were able to, in the midst of all that, I think Rahm Emanuel said, don't let a good crisis go to waste. We didn't. We were able to not only not falter, but honestly build a spectacular foundation for a bigger, better, stronger Hilton than it had ever been in its now 100-year history. And that all, I would argue, came out of the Great Recession. I do not think we would be where we are with having not gone through that. It forced us, I use a lot of these adages all the time. Necessity does become the mother of invention. We did not have a choice but to get hyper-focused in our strategy and how we performed and building an incredible culture and making sure that we were giving people that vision of the future. We had to over-index to that because we had a tougher challenge than all of our competitors who were lower leverage and didn't have all these same things in headlines that they were dealing with. But and by the way, it's a job that's never done. We're not done at Hilton. We're celebrating 100 years this year. I'm wearing this pin proudly because it's the thing I'm most proud of anything I've been associated with in my entire career. Hilton being the #1 great place to work in the United States, I think soon, hopefully the #1 great place to work in the world. By the way, we're the only hospitality company ever to be #1 on the list. We're the first non-tech company since 2004, I think, to be #1 on that list. And it's not because I want us to be on a list. I think it's back to the reflection of what I said. It's about culture. It's about creating a family environment where we take care of the people of this company and they take care of the customers, and it allows us to do some really special things.
Clearly, that is the reason why you did not become a lawyer. And,
yes.
And you focused on the people side of the business. I think this picture on the left, as John would say, it wasn't entirely obvious that picture would exist with those joyous, smiling faces in 2013. What essentially was an investment made prior to the Great Recession and the kind of turmoil that went through. And this is a buy, fix, and sell enterprise that is darn good at it.
Yeah, they are darn
But that
good
also focuses on great leadership. The outcome here is one that has been transformative for Blackstone, most certainly, in terms of the greatest leverage buyout ever, and a 4x in terms of a return to Blackstone on their investment, even when they had to spend another $800 million in terms of buying down the debt. that has created the ability now for you to do all those things. You now have this vibrant business that yet again has been fixed and solved for, internal challenges that you knew about, external challenges that you didn't know about.
That's for sure.
And now you have this incredible place where people feel tremendously valued. You have this incredible DNA operation opportunity. We met some great members of your team.
We have some of our Operation Opportunity team members here. Stand up. All right. Thank you, guys. Representing the Army, Navy, and Marine Corps there, and Hilton.
So Paige has, this is a great picture. Actually, maybe one of the best pictures.
My daughters hate this picture.
Oh, it's so
great. It's
great.
funny you find, I have it in my office, big one on the back wall, and whenever my daughters have come into my office, they're like, can you please get a better picture of us?
You've described your father to me as your greatest mentor. You also said to me that he taught you humility and said that
He
that
did.
was, I can imagine that this has taught you a lot of humility right here. Having all of these vibrant faces, you know, you're the boss when you get, when you leave and,
Yeah,
and then you go
I
to the
gotta tell you, I am so not the boss at home. It is, I question whether I'm the boss at work too some days, but I certainly am not when I go home. I have a lot of bosses that like to have me doing certain things, but I would not have it any other way. I've talked a lot about my lovely, intelligent, full of life wife, Paige. All of my girls are all growing up. This is an old picture, so the baby that's on my shoulders would crush me. She's the tallest kid I got. She's in high school. She's about to turn 16, so this is a ways old. My oldest is almost 26, and they're all doing great, and they're all, most importantly, there's only one, I mean, there are a lot of things I want to do for them. What I want to give them, and what Paige and I have tried to give them, is the greatest gift that my parents and her parents have given her and me and us, and that is just an incredible value system. Starting with humility, which I think goes a long way in an industry like ours that is people serving people, and where it takes literally the village to get things done. Recognizing that and understanding that you have a role, but you're one role, and that there are a lot of roles that have to come together in harmony to make all these things happen. And so that I hope, and I see so far in my great kids, that they are real people. I mean, I'm a lot of things, and I'm not a lot of things, a lot of other things, but in the end, I try very much to, I am who I am, be humble and the authentic person that you hopefully see up here today, and that those that know me and how they see me interact, how you and I interact, even when you're stealing my money on a golf course because you're a sandbagger. You knew I couldn't let you go on that.
That's, you have... There was a slide in here that I deleted like yesterday, and it had his index on it, and there was next to it an index. There was like literally I deleted it, and I went back and forth and back and forth. I said I have to put this out there.
I know. Mid knows I sustained a neck injury over the holidays, and it has truncated my golf career.
So this is truly the closing slide, and family. We've talked about.
I think they've had enough of talking about me.
I do view though that your family upbringing, and this beautiful picture on the left that I want to finish with is your wonderful family, brothers, sisters, mom, dad, all these beautiful faces and these kids full of joy, and you all live like together, right, in one area, and you see each other every week.
My parents live a mile away in the house I grew up in, so that they moved into the house they live in when I was 9 months old, so it's the only place I ever knew. And my two little sisters are my next door neighbors, and all our backyards open up together. So at one time, before all the kids started growing up, we had 14 cousins that were all right next to each other. It was complete, utter chaos and anarchy, but so much crazy fun. And a great support network, particularly in what I do for a living. I travel a lot, right? We're in the travel business. I'm all over the world all the time. And I love the fact that my wife and children have had this incredible support network of my family. And from my point of view, getting back to the humility thing and being authentic, the reality is not just because of my wife, but I look at my parents, my siblings, all the people, my nieces, nephews. I've always viewed that, sort of compartmentalized like my life a little bit, which is in my career, as we've covered some of it, a lot of it, I guess, I like to take risks. I like to push myself. I like to learn. I like intellectual stimulation, different things, and to push the limits. The only reason I've been able to do that, in addition to my incredible wife, is all the rest of my family, and they're not in this picture, but I have lifelong friendships with a bunch of people, literally, that I started in elementary school with, that live in the area, that I keep up with. And that part of my life is foundational. Like that's the rock that every weekend, if I'm gone all week and I'm in India like I was last week, or running around the country and I get home, I have that foundation, those relationships that are a constant and that provide unbelievable support and love. And both ways. They're not just giving it to me. I'm trying hard to keep up and support, do my part to contribute to those relationships, because it's not a one-way street. Doesn't matter, I'm running around the world. All of them have important things going on in their life. But that foundation of my family and really close-knit group of friends that I work really hard at has allowed me to do all these other things, because it gives me sort of the confidence to know that the most important part of my life is going to be reasonably stable. I mean, there's, things happen, kids, and, there's a lot of moving parts. But I could never have taken going back to like taking on debt to start the first business or go to host or any of these things. I never would have done it without those people and a bunch of others. It would have never happened. And I am humble enough to accept that I'm like the luckiest guy in the world. The reality is I get to get up every day and really love what I do. I love who I do it with. I've got unbelievable, stable relationships in my personal life that I've had for 50 years that mean a lot to me, that I invest in. I have been incredibly fortunate to have some crazy good mentors in my life. My father-in-law, Terry Golden, who you saw, others in business, John Gray, in business, my wife, who is, a life partner, my children who call BS all the time and keep me well grounded, some lifelong friends that really always help me remember sort of who I am, where I've come from, and that life is, that you need to be authentic and really stay true to who you are. So, like anything, life is about, working hard and making your luck and all those things. But I think life's about, people and relationships and working hard at those and giving to those. And so, one of the sort of great lessons for young people, I'd say, is all these great friendships that you have, and it's easier in your day and age, keep up with them. Like they are immensely important, and if you invest in them, they can really provide just an incredible foundation for you to be happy in life, in your personal life, but also to be happy in your career, because they can allow you to do bigger and better things, with the comfort of knowing you have an incredible foundation of family and friends that are behind you.
Chris, I am deeply grateful for our friendship. And I know that we are all very, very appreciative and fortunate that you are such a leader in our industry that continues to do things on behalf of all of us, our military, our women leaders in our industry. And I know that your family and all those beautiful faces look to you and see someone that has truly lived a life that matters. And so from all of us, thank you so much for everything that you do.
Thanks.
Chris Nassetta.
Thank you, Tom.
Chris and Mitt, thank you for an inspirational session. Chris, thank you for openly and heartwarmingly sharing so many life lessons that we'll all take with us. And we're so pleased to present you with a commemorative piece that was developed for the Bharat Shah Leadership Speaker Series. It resembles the Georgia State Flame, and it's an honor to present it to you as our sixth speaker. Thank you.
Thank you.